Okay, so what I want to do in this particular video is to look at Manabases in Pauper, right? So we are going to start by looking a bit at the Manabases that common decks have, right? So we are going to be looking at tier 1 decks and trying to understand all the decisions behind the Manabase, right? So let's start with the easiest deck in terms of mana basis, which is Burn, right? Burn is a deck that plays uh, mostly cards that cost 2 or less mana. These cards here only cost 1 mana most of the time, and this is free also most of the time if you have 2 mountains. So this deck in particular plays 15 mountains and 2 Forgotten Caves. So maybe possible they bring in Molten Rain, and this card costs 3 mana, and well, maybe you just are going to be paying the cost of not being able to cast this spell sometimes, but when you cast it, maybe it's strong enough for you to consider it a good saver plan, right? So let's look a bit at the numbers, okay? Um, when you try to think about the mana base you want for a deck, you want to understand how many lands you're going to need, right? It would be amazing if you always have your colors and they enter untapped and you can play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana spells on curve, right? But most of the time that's not going to be the case, right? You're going to be mulliganing a bit to find your lands and all that. So um, here in Burn, we see that most of the cards that we have cost 1 mana, uh, and some of them cost 2 mana, like Searing Blaze, and you can consider Needle Drop as a 2 mana spell most of the time, if you don't have a Thermal Alchemist or a Guild Laboratory trigger to trigger the what Needle Drops needs to be cast, right? But yeah, so we are going to be thinking about when do we mulligan, right? So one easy way of thinking of this is that you're not going to be keeping any zero land hand, right? If you keep a zero land hand, you're probably going to lose. Um, at the same time, you are not going to be keeping a 6 land hand, right? So you have two things to consider here: how many lands you play and how many lands is too much for your deck, right? So for this deck, I think the crucial number is 2. If you're if you're a burn player, you only draw 2 lands and not more than 2 lands for 5 turns. You're going to be pretty fine with that, right? You're going to be able to deploy most of your cards, um, and you're going to be able to cast all your spells most of the time at least. And if you play all of your spells in a timely manner, you're going to win probably, because Burn is a very high pressure deck, right? So let's do some calculations. In this video, I'm going to be using hypergeometry calculators. The name is very complex and everything, but really simple what it does. Here you say how many cards do you have in your deck. We have 60 cards in your deck, right? Or it will be I'm going to do another video about how to use this in other situations, but for the sake of this, that this is just going to check how many lands we need to put in our deck to mulligan less, right? This is going to be more or less that, right? So number of successes in population is going to be 17 because we have 17 lands in our deck. Sample size, this is the important number. How many cards are we seeing, right? So we are a burn player and we're trying to understand our mulligan decisions. So we are going to be seeing 7 cards because that's what we see when we are trying to mulligan, right? And how many lands do we want to see? So what this is seeing is in 60 cards with 17 successes that are lands, and I'm seeing 7 cards, what are the chances of me hitting 2? So what this is going to say is that the probability of seeing exactly 2 lands is going to be 33, 8, 9, etc. %, right? Or a more interesting thing to look here is that the probability of seeing at least two lands with all these parameters is going to be approximately 65% of the time. So this means that 65% of the time you're going to see a 7-card hand with two lands. So this is interesting because if you're a burn player, if you played burn several times, you're going to remember all those things, all those times that you didn't have one or two lands to play, right? So maybe we can narrow it down a bit, because maybe we have a one land hand that has a lot of good removal, good bolts and everything, and we just need to draw into our second land. So in this case, we are going to change all the parameters to just hit one land, right? What are the chances of we hitting one land? And the chances are at least one land in a 7-card hand is going to be 91%, right? This is going to be taking all the hands that has 6 or 7 lands, and we can also ouch. Oh, okay. Well, we just put here the same parameters. And let's say if we have 6 or more lands in a 7-card hand, we don't want to keep that. So we know also that 0.001% of the time we are going to mulligan because we have a lot of lands. This isn't going to be the case most of the time, but it's something that may happen. At the same time, if we have a hand that has 4 lands, we are also going to mulligan because that's a lot. And in this case, it's almost 10%, which is relatively high if you think about it, right? If you're playing burn and you draw 7 cards and you see 4 lands, you're going to be like, how this happens? I play so few lands, right? So the key here is that you have to be cognizant of this number, right? If you're playing burn and you see that you're mulligan a lot because you don't have enough lands to play, maybe this is because the chances aren't in your favor, right? 65% of the time, keeping is kind of a lot to pay, right? If you instead of playing 17, you play 19 lands, and you do the same calculations, you're going to have 72%. So if you have 20 lands, let's say, then 75%, and so on. So the way of looking at this is what are the people that built this deck thinking, right? So they think I'm okay with mulliganing a bit. The golden number for reaching 2 lands in Magic is 18 lands. If you play 18 lands, you're going to have a reasonably high percent chance of finding your 2 lands for turn 2, right? So that's very important. Here you are going to be skewing a bit less on that because you don't mind mulliganing a bit more or keeping a 1 land hand, because eventually you're going to find your other land and so on. I personally try to play 18 to 19 lands in burn for this reason. I prefer not to mulligan a lot, because if you mulligan, you are going to be keeping hands that are very bad or something, and you don't need to do that, right? If you play 17 mountains and 2 forgotten caves, you're going to have more or less um, more hands kept at 7 instead of going to 6 or 5, right? Even if probably if you go here and see what Lord Virus plays, he plays even 16 lands, which is even greedier. Okay, more people that play 16 lands. Apparently, I don't know, maybe some born expert can say you about this, but honestly, I think 16 land is too few, especially if you post-board have Molten Rain. This isn't cool, right? The chances of hitting a turn 3 Molten Rain, let's see. We have 16 land, which is, well, this is going to be turn 3, right? Because we're going to draw for our turn on turn 2 and turn 3. And the chances of us seeing 3 lands is going to be 45%. Maybe this isn't a really good example, right, of a correctly built mana base. And even this is the easiest deck in terms of mana bases. So yeah, I'm going to cap here this video, and then I'm going to continue with other decks in the future. Um, yeah, I'm going to try to talk with someone that's an expert in burn and try to talk about the mana base, because honestly it doesn't feel right to play 16 lands in a deck that has 3 drops in the post board, or even 2 drops, several 2 drops that wants to play on time. So yeah, I'll try to find some answers there. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.